Good morning. Now I'm going to appoint Tony to be my volume control to make sure that we can hear me when I'm speaking. And Tony, if you can't hear me, you just raise your hand. I want to welcome all of you to be with us this morning. It's obvious that they published who was going to be speaking. I can tell by the size of the crowd. But for the rest of you that are here, we're happy that you're with us. And I want to assure you, if you are visiting, that I am not the regular minister. And so if you want to hear a good lesson, you should come back at another time. I also want to pause this morning, and I'm going to look directly at that camera for just a moment. And I want to welcome those of you that are watching us online. So often we miss them, and we wish you could be here with us, and we hope that you can be back with us soon. I'm thinking of people like Ted and Brenda, Becky and Luther and Pam and so many others that I am not mentioning right now, but also my brother Richard in Georgia, who you may not know. He attends with us almost every Sunday morning, and always glad to have him with us, even if remotely. A few years back, some of you might remember, I began a lesson with a large 7-Eleven cup sitting on the podium. And you wondered, Ralph, what on earth is that 7-Eleven cup got to do with worshiping the Lord? And I said to you that I wanted you, when you were driving down the road, ever since that Sunday, that every time you went past a 7-Eleven store, that you remembered that the next number after 7-Eleven was 712, because that is the text for our today's lesson. Matthew, the first chapter in the first book in the New Testament, and 7:12 is well known in the world. Most people refer to that as the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, you may not realize, but almost all the world's religions have some version of the golden rule. For example, there's a golden rule in Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and even Mohammedanism. The unique thing is that almost all of those golden rules are stated in the negative. For example, whatever you don't want people to do to you, don't do it to them. But the uniqueness of the Christian golden rule is stated in the positive sense. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, you have to be careful how you apply that. If I think about this, some of us like pizza, and sometimes we have pizza that's left over. So the next day when you're eating your pizza, do you heat it up or do you eat it cold? Some of you actually like cold pizza. Now, does this mean that when you have somebody over, you serve them cold pizza? Or do you serve them pizza the way they would like for it to be? The golden rule is not just give people what we would like, but to give them what they would like, because that's the way we would like to be treated. We would like for people to give to us the things that we like to receive. That's an interesting question. Now that it's Christmas time and we're gift giving, do we give other people what we want to give them? Or do we give them what they want to get? It's much harder, I would suggest, to give somebody something that they want to get, because that means you've got to sort of study it and get to know them and understand what they like and what they don't like in order to give them something that they might be happy to receive. But isn't that how we are? We want people to give us those things that we would like to receive. It also applies to other areas of our life. Today, specifically, I'm going to go from the golden rule in verse 12 back to verse 1. And this brings us to the subject of judging. Matthew 7:1 may be the most often quoted verse in the Bible by non-believers. I think everybody that doesn't know anything about religion knows Matthew 7:1. Judge not that you be not judged. Now, I think in the golden rule, we would say, well, If you find yourself judging others, does that mean that you want other people to judge you? Not often are we very comfortable with being judged. And we often find that the people that tell us, judge not that you be not judged, also go on to say, that means that you can't judge me. Your own Bible tells you not to judge me. But they're also then taking it out of context. For example, they use that to say that we can't even go as far as to criticize or point out someone when they're doing what is wrong. Some people even apply it to church discipline, something that we don't talk about very much anymore, but even within the church, we say, well, I can't correct somebody and I can't be judgmental of them because of this verse. But even going even further, talking about if we see somebody teaching error, we can't correct them or point out that that is just not right. Obviously, Jesus can't be ruling out all forms of judgment. And taking it out of context is a danger that we have on many subjects. We talk about the immediate context, and if you go on past verse 1, you don't get very far before you find that we are taught to judge. It's just how we go about it that we're addressing today. If you get down to verse 6, it's not humorous, but it is in a way, because in verse 6 implies that some sort of judgment has to be made because we are told not to give what is holy to the dogs or to cast our pearls before swine. Well, as I look out today, then I would have to judge which one of you are dogs and which one of you are hogs. But actually, I'm being a little humorous, but there's nothing humorous about this. It says that we have to make some sort of judgment. Also, if you get further down into the chapter, down around verse 15 or 20, it says that we have to make judgments determining who is a false teacher. By their fruits you shall know them. In other words, we can observe people and we can determine whether they are true or making a judgment about it, but how we are judging them, or whether we're judging about their actions or judging their teachings or their conduct. So the remote conduct, I was just talking about immediate context, that's context within that chapter. But if I go to other chapters and further on in the Bible, we find that on another occasion, Jesus taught that we must judge with righteous judgment. You would find that over in John 7th chapter, verse 24. We're talking about a judging not on appearance, but on action. For example, when I grew up, and Charlie would probably relate to this, you just didn't go to church without having on your suit and tie. You didn't go to church without carrying your Bible. I've even had a minister one time say, Ralph, you didn't bring your sword, you know, the Word of God. And fancy dress was looked upon as, you know, a requirement in order to worship effectively. And if you weren't following those, you were judged to be not very religious. Furthermore, we find another example of when we are called upon to judge. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 through 13, Paul said, "In the letter I wrote you, I told you not to associate with immoral people. Now I did not mean pagans, that is, people that are outside the church, who are immoral or greedy or are thieves or who worship idols. To avoid them, you would have to get out of the world entirely. What I meant was that you should not associate with a person who calls himself a believer, but is immoral or greedy or worships idols, or who is a slanderer or a drunkard or a thief. Don't even sit down with such a person to eat. After all, it is none of my business to judge outsiders. God will judge them. But should you not judge the members in your own fellowship? As the scripture says, remove this evil person from your midst. So we find that there is a different responsibility on how we look at people that are professing to be members of the church versus those that have never obeyed the gospel or become believers. Very specifically, we are told to leave the judging of those people outside the church to God. He will judge their souls. Moving on into another apostle, John, over in 1 John verses 4 through 1, we are told to test the spirits. For example, that again comes back to talking about false teachers. Dear friends, don't believe everyone who claims to have the Spirit of God. Test them all to find out if they really do come from God. Many false prophets have already gone out into the world. And we find that we have, in today's world, you don't have to look very far on the television to find false prophets. Now, in saying that, I am being judgmental, but in fact, I'm more concerned about the era of teaching that is going on than I am about falling into the trap of judging unrighteously. Jesus helps us a little bit by explaining what kind of judgment he is condemning. He is condemning those people who judge others while they themselves are living a life that could be judged. Very familiar passage, and talking about, about trying to cast the speck out of somebody else's eye when you have a beam in your own eye. I have talked about before in Colorado that I was concerned about our every morning coffee club, and we got together, and I would say that some of our conversation was judgmental or gossipy. And I was thinking about that later, and I went, wait a minute, Ralph, by labeling them, aren't you being judgmental yourself? And so sometimes we have to be careful when we start trying to straighten out the other guy, that we ourselves need to be straightened out first. Further on, we find that Jesus was talking about what kind of judgment. And I was thinking about Ron's lesson this morning about using Bible words to describe Bible things. And as I was reading this lesson, it's talked about the Lord here is condemning the spirit of censoriousness. And I had to go look that up. I wasn't sure what it meant. And you might have had a clue because it starts with the word censor. But actually, a Bible word might be one that we recognize, and that is judging harshly or self-righteously. Oh, well, why didn't you say that? So we'll stick with the Bible words. Judging self-righteously without mercy. In a parallel passage in Luke, the 6th chapter, verses 36 through 37, Jesus said, paraphrasing away, don't judge others and God won't judge you. Don't be hard on others and God won't be hard on you. Forgive others and God will forgive you. That should slow us down, because it isn't saying that we won't be judged. We will. We all know that. Every man will have to give an account for what we have done. But the fact of the matter, again, we're coming back to how you do it. And I think Ron used a term again in his lesson this morning that I would beg for when I'm standing before the judgment seat, to please cut me some slack. Well, the fact of the matter is that you can't even ask that if you haven't cut anybody's slack while you were here. It clearly tells us that we will be judged in the same manner in which we judge others. So once again, we should be very careful how we go about that. James, over in the 2nd chapter, verse 13, warns against making judgments without mercy. Because if we make them without mercy, then we should not expect any mercy to be shown to us when we are judged. Jesus himself said that. Any of you here old enough to remember, or maybe you still have the red letter Bible? So anything that Jesus said in those Bibles was printed and read. And I would encourage you that if you get nothing else out of this lesson this morning, don't remember what Ralph said, but you cannot ignore what Jesus said. And Jesus said in Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 2nd verse, "For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. With the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you." Once again, Jesus implies that there are times that we must make judgments. As I said earlier, though, it's only after we have corrected our own faults and recognized our own faults, then will we be in a position to be helpful to others in correcting them. Over in Galatians, the 6th chapter, verses 1 and 2, "My friends, you who are spiritual, so if someone is trapped in sin, you should gently lead that person back to the right path. But watch out and don't be tempted yourself." We have a responsibility as a family to each other to correct those that we see that are in need of correction. I hope that some of you love me enough that if you see me behaving in a manner that needs correcting, that you would talk to me about it and point it out. And I hope that I, as a family member, would accept that graciously and thank you for doing that. I was talking one night in a Wednesday night class over in Tennessee, and it drove home something. I made a statement like that, and the minister asked, "Well, Sister Susie, if you saw Ralph, doing something wrong, would you point it out to him? Would you go talk to him about it?" And she was an older lady in the congregation, and she said, "Well, why would I do that? We don't talk to each other now." So, and exactly the point being that we are not going to probably approach somebody that we don't know very well, and we really should get to know each other well enough that we can talk to each other about things like that. By the way, Sister Susie and I, after laughing about that, became probably the closest friend I had in that congregation before I left. And it was all started. Her son wasn't too happy with her that night and told her she was sort of outspoken and so forth, but that was Sister Susie. And I'm just so happy that I can look back and remember her so fondly now. I talked earlier about the fact that we must decide whom we apply our judgment to by determining which ones are hogs and dogs, as I talked earlier. And then we go on, and this doesn't go on forever, because in Matthew chapter 10, verses 12 through 15, we're told that judgment does have its limits. In other words, how long do we spend trying to help people? When Jesus sent his apostles out, he gave them these instructions. "But for those who are not listening or receiving judgment, we are not to waste what is good and holy on them." He said, "Shake off the dust of our feet and move on." And so sometimes that judgment on our part is how long do we keep working with someone who is not listening to us. Paul and Barnabas ran into that problem over in Antioch and Pisidia. They were there and they were teaching the Jews, and they were trying to get the message of Christ across. And in fact, they were teaching on a Sabbath and Sunday, and they were not quite finished, and the Jews asked them to please stay on another week and continued talking to us. And they did. They stayed another week teaching amongst them. But eventually, at the end of that week, Paul said to them, "I have come first to you Jews, and you're not listening. We are leaving and we're moving on to spread the word unto the Gentiles who will receive the message." So again, that required a judgment on Paul's part as to how long he had been there and how receptive his audience was and whether he should move on. So I hope it has become clear this morning that we are in sometimes called upon to judge our fellow man. But the kind of judging that is forbidden is the self-righteous, hypocritical judging, which is false and calls down God's judgment on ourselves. That was what James was talking about when he was talking about not criticizing our brother. Not the fact that we didn't correct or work with them, but that we didn't look down our noses at them and judge them even though we were guilty of the same things that we were judging them on. All of that leads back to where we started this morning, the golden rule. Do unto others as we would have them do unto you. And we should judge others as we would like to be judged. Yeah, I'm trying to come up with some example, sports-minded things. I was thinking the saddest thing that could happen would be the fact that we lived our entire lives and were as religious as we could be. We tried to follow the rules as best we could. And to go through all of that and still lose the prize because of our attitude or how judgmental we were, or the fact that we had, big sins and little sins, and I'm not as bad as that other guy. I think that's where a lot of judgment sometimes comes from, is ego. If we judge others and put them down, then we feel better about ourselves. Again, over at that congregation in Tennessee, the minister had an expression that we didn't have to blow out somebody else's candle in order for our light to shine brighter. And that is what so often I think that we consider ourselves better than those that we're putting down. I ask the question whether we are judgmental. I ask me whether I am judgmental based on appearance. In today's world, we live in a time when we're surrounded by drunkenness or alcoholics or people that use drugs. I don't dare get into same-sex marriage or homosexuality or things like that. And we all sometimes go, well, I'm better than that. I don't do any of those things. But is that the attitude that we are being encouraged to take as we try to reach out to others? Because we can take that position, and when I take that position, I am just as bad and just as sinful as the person that I'm criticizing or putting down. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it is so true. I think about some of my daughters when they were in college, and I looked at some of their friends, and some of them, whether it be piercings or the way they dressed or the way they talked, their language was atrocious. And I thought, I just thought they were terrible. And I went, wait a minute, should I be thinking they're terrible, or am I trying to say, well, I'm not like that? How effective would I ever be in talking or winning over people like that if I came across as one of those holier than thou sort of people? It is hard for us sometimes to extend that love that we should be showing to folks in order to build those relationships, to get to know them well enough that we can share the message in a way that eventually we will wear them down with our kindness and our love. Love is an interesting thing. People can tell on the drop of whatever. They can tell in a moment whether you're sincere or not. Any of you sitting in the audience right now, if you turned and said to your wife or your spouse or your friend, I love you. Now, you do that through gritted teeth or clenched teeth, and ask yourself how sincere you come across. People know whether you love them or whether you don't. Someone said, people may never remember what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel. I close this morning with, again, words from Jesus, Matthew 7, beginning with verse 21. Not everyone who calls me their Lord will get into the kingdom of heaven. Only the ones who obey my Father in heaven will get in. On the day of judgment, many will call me their Lord, and they will say, we preached in your name, and in your name we forced out demons and worked many miracles. But I will tell them, I will have nothing to do with you. Get out of my sight, you evil people. I think it is, again, as I said earlier, such a shame that we would go through life doing the best that we could, on our own laurels or our own merits, that we would think that we would be eligible for heaven. Lord, I was at church 3 times a week. I studied all the time. And those things are important. I am not suggesting we leave all those things off. Lord, I didn't drink, and I didn't smoke, and I didn't cuss, and I didn't go with the women that did. Those things are, those are the things that are there. But did we share the message of Christ in a loving manner? Did we feel sorry for those people that didn't have the advantages that we've had? And did we not share everything that we have been taught with others in the same loving, kind manner with which so many of us received that back earlier in our life? So this morning, I would plead with all of us to do unto others as we would have them do unto you, to judge others as we would be judged. If there are anyone in this audience this morning that would like to begin that walk with Jesus, we always offer this opportunity for you to do that. Or if there are any in the audience that feel that they have things that they need to discuss with the elders, whatever your needs might be, make your way to the back as we stand and sing.